It's March the 1st, 2021, and our reading in Joshua today is in chapter 11. When Jabin, king of Hazor, heard of this, he sent word to Jobab, king of Madon, to the kings of Shimron and Akshaph, and to the northern kings who were in the mountains, in the Arabah south of Kinnereth, in the western foothills, and in Naphoth Dor on the west, to the Canaanites in the east and west, to the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, and Jebusites in the hill country, and to the Hivites below Hermon in the region of Mizpah. They came out with all their troops and a large number of horses and chariots, a huge army, as numerous as the sand on the seashore. All these kings joined forces and made camp together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them, because by this time tomorrow I will hand all of them over to Israel, slain. You are to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots." So Joshua and his whole army came against them suddenly at the waters of Merom and attacked them, and the Lord gave them into the hand of Israel. They defeated them and pursued them all the way to Greater Sidon, to Misrephoth Maim, and to the valley of Mizpah on the east, until no survivors were left. Joshua did to them as the Lord had directed. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots. At that time, Joshua turned back and captured Hazor and put its king to the sword. Hazor had been the head of all these kingdoms. Everyone in it they put to the sword. They totally destroyed them, not sparing anything that breathed, and he burned up Hazor itself. Joshua took all these royal cities and their kings and put them to the sword. He totally destroyed them, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded. Yet Israel did not burn any of the cities built on their mounds, except Hazor, which Joshua burned. The Israelites carried off for themselves all the plunder and livestock of these cities, but all the people they put to the sword until they completely destroyed them, not sparing anyone that breathed. As the Lord commanded his servant Moses, so Moses commanded Joshua, and Joshua did it. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord commanded Moses. So Joshua took this entire land, the hill country, all the Negev, the whole region of Goshen, the western foothills, the Arabah, and the mountains of Israel with their foothills, from Mount Halak, which rises towards Seir, to Baal Gad in the valley of Lebanon, below Mount Hermon. He captured all their kings and struck them down, putting them to death. Joshua waged war against all these kings for a long time. Except for the Hivites living in Gibeon, not one city made a treaty of peace with the Israelites, who took them all in battle. For it was the Lord himself who hardened their hearts to wage war against Israel, so that he might destroy them totally, exterminating them without mercy, as the Lord had commanded Moses. At that time, Joshua went and destroyed the Anakites from the hill country, from Hebron, Debir, and Anab, and from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua totally destroyed them and their towns. No Anakites were left in Israelite territory. Only in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod did any survive. So Joshua took the entire land, just as the Lord had directed Moses, and he gave it as an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal divisions. Then the land had rest from war. Amen. We move now from the southern campaign to the northern. This is another decisive military campaign in the conquering of the land of Canaan. Verses 1 to 5, there is a battle at the waters of Merom. 5 of these northern kings have gathered together what's called a huge army in verse 4. And why are they gathering? Well, it's obvious. It says at the end of verse 5 to fight against Israel. Verse 6, again, and we've seen this many times, the Lord intervenes personally with Joshua to encourage him and to instruct him, to give him strategy for the battle. And verses 7 to 9, as always in these things, there's human activity involved. Verse 7, so Joshua and the whole army came against them suddenly in the waters of Merom and attacked them. So that's the human side. They've got to do that, and they do. And alongside and within and through the human activity, there is the divine assistance that's given. Verse 8, and the Lord gave them into the hand of Israel. If they hadn't stepped out, the Lord wouldn't have stepped in. That's how it works. This is typically how God works, not just in these extraordinary military campaigns of the Old Testament. It's pretty obvious here, but all the way through the Old and even into the New. By faith, this is how faith works, and God blesses that wonderfully. Verses 10 and 11. Hazor, who had been the head of all these kingdoms, he's the one who initiated the king of Hazor, Jabin, in verse 1. And Hazor was where he lived, the king of Hazor. It says, Joshua turned back, captured Hazor, and put its king to the sword. So the head, the source of it all, is crushed. And phrases are used like a refrain. It's like in a song, you know, where the chorus comes and we sing it again and again. And in these solemn chapters, we have phrases such as, everyone in it they put to the sword. They totally destroyed them. Look at the number of times that the phrase totally destroyed is used. Again, 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 again. This is total victory given to Israel, and it is a growing victory, step by step, piece by piece. They get the victory, they conquer their enemies, they possess the land. Verses 12 to 15, we are reminded that all of this is not just as Joshua commanded, but as Moses commanded. For example, back in Deuteronomy chapter 20, remember that great chapter, which is all about how to conduct warfare as the people of God. We read there in verse 17 of chapter 20 of Deuteronomy, completely destroy them. Same expression. The Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. So can you see there's a sort of chain of command going on? The source of everything is God. God commanded this. Then that was given to Moses, and he commands the people then. He commands Joshua, who commands the people now. Here in this chapter, Israel. And so it trickles down, it flows down and into and out of the people of God. Verses 16 to 20. So Joshua took this entire land. Well, I don't think that's to be understood literally. Yes, they have, in a sense, in principle. They have taken the land, but they've not yet possessed it. It's not yet been parceled out in terms of settling into the land. They've just taken it in outline. It's like the difference between D-Day. Once D-Day had happened, that was the end of the war. But it took over a year to get to VE Day. There was still fierce fighting and battles going on. And in chapter 13 and verse 1, we'll see in a few days, when Joshua was old and well advanced in years, so this is years later, the Lord said to him, "You are very old, and there are still very large areas of land to be taken over." There seems to be a contradiction there, but there isn't. They took the entire land, but then they had to take it over. They had to drive out or destroy all the inhabitants, and then they had to settle in and settle down. And not only take the land, but to possess it. There is a difference. And even this part of the military campaign, we're told, took many years. Verse 18, Joshua waged war against all these kings for a long time, and that is probably years. Except for the Gibeonites, remember, they sought peace. And of course, there was Rahab in chapter 2. She sought salvation. All of these kings, all of these cities, all of these peoples, they are implacably opposed to Israel and to the God of Israel. Like Pharaoh back at the time of the Exodus, these people, though they've heard about the true and the living God, and if they wanted to, they could have come and they could have made a peace treaty and they could have submitted themselves to the Lord. But they will not listen. They will not submit. And if people will not, they'll get to the point where they cannot. That's the point, I think, of verse 20. For it was the Lord himself who hardened their hearts to wage war against Israel, so that he might destroy them totally, exterminating them without mercy, as the Lord had commanded Moses. Yes, they had the opportunity to repent and to come to the Lord and find peace and mercy at his hand, but they hardened their hearts against him. They began the process, but the Lord will finish it, and he then will harden their hearts. You see, God is sovereign. He's totally sovereign over all of this, even human warfare, even human rebellion. He's in control of it all. And then verses 21 to 23, there's that interesting reference to the Anakites in verse 21, those giants in the land. Remember them back in Numbers 13? They pop up again here. At that stage, they terrified most of the spies, and they used these giants in the land as a reason for not going forward. They lacked faith, obviously, and they were disobedient, and they grumbled, and they perished in the wilderness. If only they trusted God, if only they'd gone forward in his strength and according to his promise, they could have done exactly what these people now were doing. Only Joshua and Caleb, they were the only two spies who saw the greatness of the giants, but the even greater greatness of the God who would give them the strength to destroy the giants. And that's exactly what we read here. At that time, Joshua went and destroyed the Anakites from the hill country. And so God's people, they fight, they take. But they can only do that because the Lord gives. He gives what he has promised, and he's offering it to them. He gives, he promises, but he commands. There's only one way. They obey the command. They come, they go, they fight, they take, they possess. This is the only way, and this is always the way. This is how true faith works. True saving faith. It's exactly the same today. We're not fighting for ground, literal ground in the Middle East. Today, it's salvation that's being offered. Today, it is growing in grace and maturity, and how we develop as God's people, as an army, but now in a spiritual sense. True faith works. We aren't saved by works, but we are saved to do works, good works, and if we are truly saved, we will work. And that principle is wonderfully illustrated here in the book of Joshua, throughout Joshua, but particularly in this chapter. They must obey, they must step out, and as they do so, God will bless. He will step in. This principle of the relationship between faith and works is taught so clearly in James chapter 2. Let me read 2 verses there. Verse 14. What good is it, my brothers, if a man claims to have faith, but has no deeds? Can such faith save him? And then right to the end, you could read that passage as a follow-up to today, if you like, and you read right down to verse 26. Interestingly, in this chapter, Rahab is mentioned. In fact, I'll read at verse 25. In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? This is the punchline to everything today. As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead.